afternoon. This is Evelyn Ackah. I'd like to thank you all for participating in this PEGA presentation. It's a webinar on NAFTA options for professional engineers and other members of a PEGA. We're just going to give it 1 minute, and we still are expecting about another 20 people. We've got about 121 registered participants, so if you can give me 1 minute longer, we'll begin right away, and it'll be a useful hour of our time. And if we need more, we'll go a little bit longer to answer all the questions. Thank you very much. If anybody has not muted their phone, can you please ensure you mute your phone? We'll also do it on our end so that there's no disruption to anybody. Okay, let's get started. I want to make sure this is a useful hour for everybody. I would recommend, please, that everybody mute their phones. It would really help me so that I can focus on you and all the information we're going to share for this hour. And then we can get started. So I'd like to introduce myself to you. This is me. I'm Evelyn Ackah. Thank you so much for participating in this webinar for PEGA. I'm very grateful for the opportunity with the professional development team at PEGA. So I'll be going in and out where you can look at me in my office or also looking at the slides. And as we say, please send all your questions through the webinar platform, and we'll answer them all as quickly as we can. So long as they're relevant to the presentation slides, I will stop and answer them. Otherwise, I will answer all questions at the end and ensure that you get the information that you need. So please mute your phones. If you haven't, make sure your phones or your mobiles are off, and we'll get started right away. Thank you so much. All righty. So we're focused here today on NAFTA requirements for working in the United States. Again, my name is Evelyn Ackah. I'm the founder and managing lawyer of Ackah Business Immigration Law. Here in Calgary, we also have a Vancouver and Toronto small offices there. And we do immigration law from coast to coast to coast, as well as cross-border into the United States. So we will get started. And all of you will have the ability to access all the slides as well. We've uploaded them, as well as all the other handouts. We've already uploaded them, so you can access them as well. Okay? Thank you. So this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go through a brief introduction of NAFTA, and then we're going to talk about the NAFTA requirements for engineers, geologists, engineering technicians, technologists, and NAFTA management consultants. At the end, we'll also talk a little bit about NAFTA intercompany categories to also give you some information in case it's relevant to you if you're still currently employed. Looks like we've reached our maximum of 101 attendees. I think we had initially about 121 lined up, so I'm sorry if some people aren't able to make it. So this is a little, this is just a little picture that I found, a cartoon. It says art, art everywhere. When are we going to get some engineers? And we really do need them. And I think in the United States you'll find that there is a need still for engineers. And so I'm hoping that this will be a useful hour for you. So this is just a brief introduction of our law firm. Again, the thing with immigration law is that it's constantly changing. It is very stressful and confusing and frustrating, and it's really important, whoever you work with, that you find an expert, given that all the things that are at stake for you. It's very important. I've been practicing immigration law for almost 20 years, and we focus, as I said, at Ackah Law on Canadian and U.S. NAFTA immigration law. My goal today is to simplify the process and show you how you can open doors for yourself into the United States. So the current economic climate in Canada, we all know right now, especially in Alberta, is very challenging. We know that there are a number of people that are struggling right now to find employment or dealing with maybe changing and transitioning into other things. So what I thought would be useful when I proposed this presentation to 𝒂𝒂𝒉 is to focus on how members of 𝒂𝒂𝒉 can move to the United States, whether they're cross-border employees or whether they're permanently working in the United States for up to 3 years at a time and renewing their status. So this presentation is going to focus on giving you a very detailed overview of your U.S. immigration options for employment or consulting, as an engineer, as a geoscientist, as a technician, and how best to do that. Okay, next slide. All right, so if you're working with NAFTA, you have to recognize that the North American Free Trade Agreement was established in 1994, and its focus is to support economic trade relationships between U.S. and Canada and Mexico. So as part of NAFTA, the great category that I think you will benefit from is known as the TN visa. And the TN visa is a treaty NAFTA visa, which permits qualified Canadians and Mexican nationals to enter the United States for temporary employment. You must be a citizen of Canada or the United States, you must be a citizen of Canada or Mexico to qualify for TN. You cannot be a permanent resident. A lot of times people think because they're permanent resident they can benefit from NAFTA, and you cannot. And it works the same way for Americans into Canada. They must be American citizens. They cannot be green card holders. So NAFTA is a preferred method to facilitate cross-border travel into Canada and the U.S. and Mexico. It's used for temporary entry only, and that means, up to the term of your work permit or your entry status. So it is not a permanent answer. It's not a green card. It's not citizenship. It is temporary entry. And the three main categories under NAFTA are as follows: business visitor, professionals, which is the TN category we'll be discussing primarily, and intercompany transferees. So for NAFTA, to be a business visitor, this is for short-term entry. Those who are entering the United States for meetings, training, sales activity, job search activities, and even interviews. You cannot be engaged in work under the business visitor category. Very important that you recognize this. You cannot be in the United States working under the B1 business visitor category. You can only enter the United States for meetings, and you can go and you can enter up to 6 months at a time. However, you have to satisfy U.S. immigration officials at every entry that you truly are entering as a business visitor with no intention to be working and no intention to be a permanent resident as a business visitor. A lot of Canadians don't recognize that when they enter the United States, they're actually getting visas. It's kind of done automatically. You have your Canadian passport, you show it to them, they scan you in. You've just been issued a B1 visitor as a business visitor, or a B2 visa, which is for personal travel as a tourist. Those are the two entries that people enter the United States. Okay. Next slide. I wish we could move this along. There we go. Okay, so the next slide is going to focus on The next slide is going to be business visitors, and the whole focus for us now is on the fact that you can go in as, once you're a TN visa holder, as a NAFTA professional for a 3-year work permit. And this is the one we're going to be focusing on primarily today. This allows you to enter, get a work permit right at the border or at the airport, and get a work permit to work for a U.S.-based employer. In order to qualify for a TN visa, you need to have the minimum educational or experience requirements. You must be exercising the skills of the profession. You must have an offer or contract, and you have to be listed under the NAFTA Professional 66 plus categories or professions, which do include engineer, geoscientist, scientific technician, technologist. It's important that you realize that for positions like director or VP, they're not categories that are listed under NAFTA. It has to be professional. So lawyer, teacher, doctor, geologist, those are the types of categories that you'll find. All right, so in order to qualify for a TN visa, you need to have a degree. Almost all of the TN categories are focused on education. And that means you need to have at least a 3-year bachelor's degree. Most of them are 4-year degrees here in Canada that satisfies the degree requirements. So the important element is that you must have the degree. It's not about how long the course is to qualify as a bachelor's degree minimum. The other requirement or qualification would be as a post-secondary diploma or certificate holder. And those are, for very few categories, allow you to qualify for TN as a certificate holder. And one of them is the scientific technician technologist category. So we'll discuss that as well in more detail. All righty. So the NAFTA professionals category is one that is really focused on temporary intention. So with immigration law, you must understand that the focus is based on intention. One intention is temporary, another intention is permanent. So for a TN visa, your intention must be temporary. And that means you can go in with the intention of being there for up to 3 years and working, absolutely, but you're not there to live permanently. You haven't given up everything on the Canadian side, for instance. You need to still maintain that temporary intention to be here for 3 years or possibly longer, but you're not moving yourself as a permanent resident or green card holder. Sometimes it is difficult to move from TN visa to green card, and we'll talk about that as well. I'll talk about the process very high level, but there is a way to have dual intention and actually be a TN visa holder. One thing that's fantastic about the TN visa is there's actually no limit on the number of visas that are issued annually. Unlike the H-1B, which is the visa where they have only 65,000 generally issued every year, and they always cap out, and many people miss out. The TN doesn't have a minimum or a maximum number. And you can continue on 3 years after 3 years after 3 years. I have many clients who've lived in the United States for upwards of 12 to 15 years as TN visa holders, and for whatever reason are choosing not to become permanent residents in the United States. One question we've already received is, if I'm vacationing in the United States but working for a Canadian employer, do I require a visa or a TN? And the answer to that is no. If you're not working for a U.S. entity while you're in the United States, you do not require a TN visa. So I hope that answers the question. Under NAFTA, to qualify for it, it basically is focused on the provisions in Appendix 1603 of NAFTA. You must possess the necessary credentials. And that means, again, having a bachelor's degree as a minimum, except for very few exceptions, and being asked to perform the professional duties that are part of the job. And so most of the professions listed do require a bachelor's degree or higher, as I've indicated. There are very few exceptions to that, and those would be management consultant, scientific technician technologist, technical publications writer, and medical laboratory technologist. These positions, these TN categories, you're eligible for if you have either experience, in the case of management consultant, 5 years or more in your field, and proof, whether that's reference letters or contracts previously proving your expertise, or as a scientific technician technologist, a 2-year diploma or certificate program. And I'll get into more of these as well later on in the presentation. We've also been asked a question about what if the degree you have is not from Canada? And my answer to you is it doesn't matter as long as you have qualified, let's say as an engineer in Canada, you have a degree. Sometimes we would recommend getting it equated, which means, you know, having an agency equivalize your degree in terms of what it would be if it was in Canada or the US. But generally speaking, we have many, many people with degrees from all over the world. So long as it's been recognized, let's say by a PEGA or by your professional organization, you do not need to worry about that. You would qualify, especially you would have to be a Canadian citizen as well. So this is just another cartoon. It says, I understand you're looking for engineers. And that's what I'm hoping the U.S. is doing right now. I'm hoping that there will be opportunities for engineers in the United States. So what's so great about the NAFTA engineering category for a TN is that all different engineering positions qualify. And that applies to civil engineers, petroleum engineers, mechanical, environmental, even software engineers qualify. So long as it's a degreed professional, you can use the TN category as an engineer under NAFTA. It doesn't specify which specialties of engineering qualify. It basically says all engineering degrees and specialties qualify. So that's fantastic. You must have the requisite degree. We've already talked about that. What's interesting is that under NAFTA, they are not focused on your membership as a member of a professional association, like a PEGA. Like what the equivalent of a PEGA is in the United States or in the state that you are found employment. So you don't have to worry about that step. The step that immigration focuses on is, do you have a degree? Do you qualify for the job? Do you have a job offer? That's what you need. And another thing that's really interesting is under the TN category, no experience is necessary if you're qualifying as an engineer. You can be an engineer right out of university with your degree, and you get a job offer if you're lucky enough in the United States, and you would qualify immediately as a TN visa holder. Okay? So on to the next slide. Some issues with this. Okay, great. Most successful TN engineer categories possess a bachelor's degree in either, usually it's science or even engineering, with a specialization in some aspect of engineering. So it depends on the degree program that you participated in. It could be a bachelor's of science focused on engineering, or it could be a bachelor of engineering, or something similar. So long as there's proof that the degree had engineering required courses and components based on your transcript, you would qualify. And I would say to you that a lot of times people ask me the question, what if I have a Bachelor of Arts or degree in sociology or political science? Could I qualify for TN? Let's say as an engineer, maybe that person has somehow moved into a software engineering position that they've taught themselves, computer science or engineering or computer engineering. That is not a likely leap. It has to make sense. So for instance, it must be a science-based degree or an engineering-based degree or a mining-based degree. It has to be something that we can equate to an engineering profession. In the past, for instance, we have made other cases for people as hotel managers or economists. Say somebody with an economist degree as a bachelor's of economics has qualified as an accountant under NAFTA, for instance. But they have to be related. There has to be some relevance. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's important to understand that for the TN, you only need to have a bachelor's degree. And I stress this because a lot of people ask me, what about the qualifications for the PN? Do I need to re-qualify? Of course, you'll likely have to, with your new employer in the United States, go through the steps if you're going to be the person that's signing the reports or the letters or the documents. But you can still work in the capacity as an engineer in the United States just as soon as you get your engineering TN visa. The requirements on the state level are separate. So I just need everybody to understand that. You don't need to qualify immediately through the state, provincial, or the state regulatory body and in order to get your TN. You can get your TN first. Okay? This is not moving very well today. I'm not sure why. Sorry about that, guys. All right. So I also want to talk about the next stage, which we're focused on. Let's see, is the NAFTA geologist and geoscientist. These are for those of you who are not engineers as members of 𝒂𝒂𝒉, but are geologists. What's so great about this is that the TN category also includes geoscientists and geologists in the listing of professions. So similar to the engineers, a geologist must also have a bachelor's degree. Okay, that is a requirement. They also must have the ability to have a job offer in the United States. So when we talk later on about what you need to qualify for TN, the degree, the job offer, those are the two components. That's it. You don't need experience. So very similar to the engineering. You can come right out of school and qualify as a geologist. Okay. Then the next category that we're going to discuss is the NAFTA engineering category, and this is for NAFTA engineers who are technician technologists under NAFTA. This is a very interesting category, and we'll talk about this in detail because this is the category, this is one of the few categories where you can qualify without a degree, but you must be working in direct support of a degreed professional. So, as I mentioned earlier, the people that usually qualify for TNs have bachelor's degrees, but the engineering technician technologists, or the way it's listed under NAFTA is scientific technician technologist, they do not require a bachelor's degree. They require a 2-year diploma or 2-year certificate program, and they have to be working in direct support of a degreed professional. So when we do these TN applications, we include some material of the engineer that they would be working, or geologist that they would be working in collaboration with. So we would include that person's degree, copy of their degree. We would include that person's resume, and also sometimes we even include their job description to prove that they're working as a degreed professional. The other thing that we have to prove for the TN category is that this technician technologist possesses the theoretical knowledge to do the job, and that's always very clear. You know, they wouldn't be getting a job offer if they didn't have the knowledge to do the job. And they have to be able to show that they possess the ability to solve practical problems in their field. So that is the requirement on the technician technologist. So to meet this requirement, as I indicated, we usually include these documents: resume, job description, copy of degree of the degreed professional, and sometimes we even include a copy of the Canadian passport of the degreed professional. However, you should know it can be an American, it can be a U.S. person that is the degreed professional working in collaboration with the technician technologist. It doesn't have to be a Canadian, but if it is, we include the details of that person, and we show that they are working in collaboration. Even if they're not working together or directly together, they can even be cross-border. They just must be able to show that they're working somehow in collaboration with a degreed professional, since they don't meet that 4-year or 3-year degree requirement. So as I indicated, most engineering technician technologists have a 2-year diploma. And so we usually include that. We need to have that diploma or certificate along with maybe even their transcript to show the kinds of courses that they've been participating in. We also like it if they have several years of experience in the profession, because again, we need to be able to show that they have established that expertise and that knowledge. In the past, we've been lucky enough to obtain some TNs for technicians, technologists who even don't have a diploma or certificate, because we've based it on their work experience and on the job training, and then we've managed to get their experience equated or equivalized by an assessment organization so that they would then produce a report that says this person's 5-10 years experience is equal to a 2-year diploma or certificate, and we presented that report. I have to tell you, though, it is very discretionary whether or not the U.S. CBP, the Customs and Border Protection officials, will accept that, but we've been successful historically. It always depends on who you get. So much of immigration law is who you get. And if you get a great, knowledgeable person, it makes life so much easier. Okay. So when we talk about NAFTA, these are the company requirements. So when you're looking for a job opportunity in the United States, you need to find a U.S.-based employer who has a position available for you and is making you an offer. And that employer has to be engaged in business for the most part. You have to be able to show you have a legitimate job offer. And that they require you in your role as a professional engineer or a degreed engineer or a degreed technician technologist with a diploma or geologist. And the position can be full-time or part-time. That is the U.S. company requirement. In terms of you as a candidate, you must be a Canadian citizen or a Mexican citizen. You must have the qualifications and be able to present it, which means your original degree. And we'll talk further about what documents to take to the border or the airport when you apply for your TN visa. And the position must require you to have your NAFTA professional qualifications as an engineer to do the job. So again, you can't just be considered a manager or a vice president or director. You have to actually be working in the field of the profession that you're listed under. All right, so when we do a TN visa application, these are the documents that we recommend our clients take with them. So we make sure they have a valid passport and try to have at least 3 years or more validity, because you want to get the most bang for your buck. If you're applying for the TN, you want the full 3 years that you can get. And also keep in mind that the 3 years is renewable again and again and again, so long as you have a job offer and you have an employer willing to support you on a 3-year basis for renewing your TN, you can do this indefinitely. Also, you would want to have an original employer support letter or original job offer letter. We recommend you use the original letter. U.S. Immigration has a real thing about photocopies. They really, really prefer original documentation. So we, as lawyers, we also prepare for our clients an original legal submission letter. And we highly recommend this because it outlines what the law is and why you, as a candidate for TN, qualifies. So we go through all of your credentials, we go through NAFTA, we outline why you fit, and we make it really clear for USCBP so that they're more likely to approve you. We also recommend that you bring your original degree. And it's crazy. If you have to take it off the wall, we tell you to take it off the wall, because depending on who you get, they may send you back to get the original. So just save yourself time when you're doing that first application and bring the original. If you have more than one degree, bring it all. Bring it. They're all related to engineering. Bring them all. If you have a master's, bring it. We also, if you have university transcripts, say, why not bring them along too? More is better than less, because your job is to satisfy the U.S. immigration officer that you qualify for the TN. We also recommend bringing a resume or a CV that outlines all of your experience and all the years you've worked in your field. So that also gives you credibility as an expert in the engineering or geologist field. If you need to have your education evaluated, as we've mentioned before, if you're educated outside of Mexico, Canada, or the U.S., it's a nice to have, it's not essential. And as I said, if you've already been recognized, let's say by a PEGA, and your education has been approved, you can just bring those reports with you and that would satisfy them. And sometimes, especially on the technician technologist side, USCBP wants to see letters of experience or reference letters from your previous jobs or previous employers that also go to your knowledge and expertise. So if you have them, bring them, because more is better than less when you're dealing with U.S. immigration. And there's a filing fee of $50. It's $56, an extra $6, you get that cross-border document that allows you to do as much multiple entry as possible. So we recommend it. If you'd like to do it, you can do that too. Okay, I'm going to stop and just answer a couple questions right now before we go on to the next slide. So one of the questions is, can I get a TN on my own with an employer letter, Well, I would say to you that yes, if you have everything you need to put a package together. It's not simply an employer letter and you go and you get your TN. As I've outlined in this presentation, you must be prepared for the border. You need to have your credentials. You need to have your degree. We recommend a legal letter, so I'd recommend, if you, at least for the very first time, working with a lawyer or an immigration consultant or an expert that can make sure you'll be successful, because it is harder to fix a problem the second time around. So if you don't get in, then you come and find us to help you. It's harder for us to fix that because now you're on the system as having had a refusal. Okay, so just something to think about. I really feel like if you want to be successful the first time, do it right, and then if you need to be renewed in the future, you could likely benefit on your own and do the TN on your own. One of the other questions I have is, does that apply for business development, trying to find clients? This, I think, relates to the business visitor category. Business visitors are definitely eligible to enter the United States for purposes of business development. So if you're trying to get clients and you want to enter the United States, absolutely, you can go as a business visitor. You do not need a TN visa to enter the United States as a business visitor. Okay, and then one of the other questions I have before we get going is, does the U.S. employer have to hire me for 3 years, or can it be for less? The employment letter, I guess it's about the offer of employment. It can be indefinite, or it can be a term. It can be for 6 months or a year. The reason I always talk about 3 years is because that's the maximum time you can get. And ideally, if you've got a good employer and you're happy and they're happy, why not go for the full 3 years? And that usually occurs if you have an open-ended offer. But if you have a 1-year term or less, you can get the TN for that period of time. Absolutely. Okay? All right, we're going to go back to the presentation now. So one of the things that I want to highlight is that the application process is really unique for Canadians because we can be processed right at the border. And by border, I'm talking about port of entry at the airport or at a border crossing when you're driving over the border. That's something that really makes us unique here in Canada because we can be processed right at the border. Mexican citizens cannot be processed at the border between Mexico and the United States. They have to be processed at the U.S. consulate in Mexico. The other thing I would say is if you're going to do a TN visa application at a border crossing, at all costs, do not go to the 𝒂𝒐𝒏, Montana border. Do not make your application at that border. We highly recommend other borders. Roosevelt is good. There are other ports of entry we recommend. And if you want to call us and check with us first, we'll be happy to make recommendations. Or you fly through the Calgary airport. Give yourself 3 hours so that you get there early, you make your application, and you don't risk missing your flight. But I definitely want to make sure you know you should not go to the 𝒂𝒐𝒏 border crossing. I think it's important to speak with a professional before you go and make sure you've got everything lined up and all your ducks in a row. As I said before, it's harder to fix a problem after the fact if you've been refused than to do it right the first time. All right? Okay, next. So, in terms of NAFTA TN visa, you must ensure that your employer letter satisfies the NAFTA requirements. So I've outlined them below. Ideally, you want the letter to indicate that you're working as an engineer or a geologist or as an engineering technician technologist. So the job category, you want it to be dummy-proof for USCBP in the sense that if you're working as an engineer, you want that to be referenced in your offer letter so that it's clear to them you're working in that capacity. It needs to provide a description of the employer. So, you know, if they haven't heard of this company, it might be very small. They usually will even Google the company when you're at the airport, for instance, making your application. But it's nice if you can have some details about this is what the business does, this is why we need this person, and then we also want to talk about why you're eligible for the TN category. It also outlines kind of the compensation. They like to know how much somebody is making for the proposed engagement or the job, and also provides a description of job duties. And the length of period. So one of the questions somebody had was, if it's only 1 year, it's great if the letter says only 1 year because they will give you only 1 year. Something else to keep in mind though is if you don't indicate how much time the job is for, you can still apply for 3 years. You know, if it's indeterminate, go for 3 years. Then you need to think about, are there any special port of entry instructions? POE refers to port of entry instructions. So some ports, as I said, are better than others. Go to a good port. Find out what time they open, what time they close. Travel only if possible during business hours, Monday to Friday, because usually you get the most experienced people or officers on at that time. And make sure you also have your employer available to speak to the officers if they choose to call them to verify your employment. So, you want to make sure they're on call to verify that this is a legitimate job offer in case they do call. All right, so one of the other questions I have, I'll just answer before we go into the next slide, is will the TN qualify the engineer to work in any state or with the federal government? So let me answer that first. Yes, the TN fits for every state. So that means that any state, if the company you get a job for is in 50 states, you could work in those 50 states. It's not specific to a location of employment. Just so you know, there might be a head office in, let's say, Houston, and you get sent all across the United States. That is legitimate, and you're eligible to do that. In terms of the federal government, I really can't comment too much because generally the U.S. federal government will have certain provisions or requirements, whether it's ITAR in terms of being security checked at high level of clearance. Those are different, but you can definitely qualify as well to work for the federal government so long as you can get a TN and have an employer that's willing to sponsor you. Okay? Now, a lot of times people ask, what about my spouse? The one category that unfortunately doesn't allow for spouses to get work permits is the TN visa category. So you need to be aware of that. If you have a spouse and you want to move to the United States for the 3 years of the job, your spouse cannot work. They can go with you as a visitor, and they'll be an accompanying spouse, and children too. A TD visa is what it's called. And for the most part, you have to be married. The United States is not, I would say, as open as we are in Canada in the sense that they don't recognize the same way common law as we do. So in Canada, you can come with a common law spouse and qualify for a work permit, and the spouse, even if you're not married, can also qualify for an open work permit if you're in a skilled position. In Canada or in the U.S., that's not the case. If you're bringing children with you that are unmarried, that are 18 and under or 21 and under if they're in school, they can accompany you. Okay? But unfortunately, it does not allow for work for the spouse, and it doesn't allow for school for the spouse. They need to get an actual study permit for that, which is an F1 visa in the United States. Okay, next. I've got another question here I'm going to answer. And this one relates to, does it matter if the job offer is contract or staff or permanent position? And I would say to you that no, it does not matter, because if they're offering you a contract, and we do this all the time, if you're being offered a contract to work in the United States, you qualify as a TN visa holder based on your degree. It doesn't have to be permanent. It can be 3 months, 6 months, it could be 1 month. You know, ideally, because you're spending time and money putting the package together and the effort of it, you would love it, of course, to be longer, but it can be short term. Does not have to be permanent, and we're doing lots of TN visas right now for engineering professionals and technician technologists in the U.S. who are contracted into the United States. So I would not worry about that at all. Okay. So this little cartoon here is just one that I really like. It says engineers, geologists, and technicians on the move. And you need to know that when I talk about on the move, that means that you can even be a cross-border employee. You don't have to live in the United States. So we have some clients who go down and work for a week or 2 weeks at a time and then come back into Canada and visit their families. Their families don't move with them. So you can be a cross-border employee and have a TN visa, or you can be, or you can move there and live there full time for the 3 years you're there, and renewable and renewable. As I was saying during the actual live presentations, one of my very good friends from law school has been living in the United States for probably 15 years as a TN visa holder as a lawyer. So again, she doesn't have an employer that's able to get her to green card, but she's able to work for her employer as an indefinite TN and has no ties to Canada. So, that is definitely an option for you to consider. Is cross-border or living there for the time you're there. Another question we have is, does it matter if the job offer is, do I need to separate a TN for different clients? This is a very good question. So if you get a job offer from 2 or 3 different employers, you do need to get a TN visa for each one. Because if you're doing work for them while you're in the United States, you need to have the authority and the ability to work for them. And the only way to do that is to have a specific TN visa for that employer. Okay? Sometimes in this case like this, you might want to consider becoming a management consultant, and we'll talk about that. And this is when you can go down and say, my company has been engaged by this company to provide management consulting services. And if that's the case, then you can get a TN visa as a management consultant. And we'll talk about that now. Just changing slides. Okay, so in order to be a management consultant, you must have a bachelor's degree or 5 years experience in consulting or a related field. So let's say you've worked as an engineer for 20 years and now you want to be a consultant and not an employee or not a contracted employee. You want to provide your expertise. So you can provide services to a US-based employer or client, actually, to benefit them by way of sharing your knowledge. That is that arm's length relationship as a consultant versus an employee. And to qualify for that, as I said, you need a bachelor's degree, which you all mostly have, or you need to have 5 years or more experience. Management consultants are generally independent contractors, or they're employees of a consulting firm under contract to a U.S. entity. So, for instance, you could decide to set up your own consulting business and say, I'm going to incorporate or as a sole proprietor, and I'm going to engage with the U.S. client who wants my services. You can either do it if you're an engineer as an engineer and go in as a TN visa holder, or as an engineer, or you can go in as a consultant. And if you go in as a consultant, that arm's length relationship is there. You're not an employee now. You're here to provide expertise and to invoice them, and you don't get benefits, and perhaps they're not your only client. Those are the hallmarks of a true consultant. So if you decide you want to do that, you need to be able to get a TN for that client. If you had, for instance, a U.S. company, you might be able to go in under that engaged you as a consultant. Then you can get hired by that upper level, high level consulting firm that's hired you, and then you can provide services to all their clients. But the TN visa would be in the name of that umbrella consulting entity, so that you can go off and do all the different projects on their behalf for their clients. But if you're doing direct, your business to your client directly in the U.S., you need to have a TN for each client. So you need to think about that, because that, again, is an extra cost. You don't want to be going down and being seen to be going down, if you ever searched, to be doing work for a different client than what's on your I-94, which is your TN. It's very important. In the U.S., they don't mess around. If you get offside, you can be offside for up to 5 years or permanently, and would take a visa waiver to clear you. So you don't want to misrepresent in any way, and you want to make sure you're fully prepared to attest to what it is you say you're doing every time you enter the United States. Okay? Sometimes for people who may not have degrees, so this would be the case of technician, technologist, I would say to you, it's nice always to have letters of reference. You don't need it, but it's nice if you do, because it also further validates your expertise. Okay, so these are the documents that you would be required if you were doing an application for NAFTA consultant. All the same documents as previously referenced. However, the difference is now you need to have a signed original consulting agreement. You need to have a consulting agreement. A document, it could be 2 or 3 pages, something very simple that outlines you have been engaged in a prearranged consulting engagement by a U.S. company or organization. It should be temporary in nature. So when we talk about consulting versus employment. It's harder, I think, to get a 3-year consulting agreement. Ideally, it should be 1 or 2 years max, because you need to reflect that you're not an employee. You can be living there as a consultant, or you can be cross-border as a consultant. And you have to meet the minimum requirements we've talked about under NAFTA. And generally speaking, consultants are paid hourly, daily, weekly. You're not usually on the payroll. So again, it's that arm's length relationship that you need to be able to prove to U.S. immigration at the time of application. Okay. Okay. Next slide. So strange. I'm having trouble today moving my slides. I'm not sure why. Give me a minute, please. Not moving very well. All right, so the NAFTA intercompany transfer category. This is a category for those of you who might still be employed, who maybe have a U.S. employer, a U.S. company that's also related to your Canadian company, and you want to go down for purposes of working for the U.S. business. And under that category, it's called the L1, and it's the NAFTA category, the L1 visa. And this is for intercompanies. So I'll be very quick with this because I'm not sure it applies to many of you. But if you're an executive or a manager or a specialized knowledge worker, you will qualify under the NAFTA intercompany transfer for an L1. And so long as you can show that the companies are related, the entities are related, and you're working in the field of an executive or a manager or a specialized knowledge worker, you would qualify for the L1 so long as you've worked for the related entity in Canada for at least 1 year. Okay, so we've outlined already in the previous slide the executives. This one is now for managers in terms of what they have to be doing to exercise discretion. Okay. I'm not going to go into this too much. I want to be able to answer your questions. And then there's also a category called functional manager. And the functional manager is the one where you are, you're not actually managing staff, but you're managing an essential function in the organization. These would all qualify as L1A. The L1A is the intercompany transfer for managers, executives, and functional managers. The L1B is for specialized knowledge workers. And as a specialized knowledge worker, you want to be able to show that you have and possess knowledge that's valuable to the employer, that makes them competitive in the marketplace, and that you can only gain from at least a year or more of experience working for the Canadian business before you were transferred to the U.S. business. And you need to keep in mind, as a transferee, it doesn't mean you're moving there even permanently. You could be a cross-border employee that has staff that you review and that you manage cross-border. And then in that case, when you go into the United States, you want the L1 for that purpose. Okay? The other thing I wanted to talk about, which is great about the L1, and this is why it's different from the from the TD, is the L2 visa. L1 allows the spouse that is accompanying to get an employment authorization document. It means that your spouse can work. So long as you're married and you have an accompanying spouse and you have the L1 visa, your spouse can then enter. She or he will get the L2, which is the accompanying visa, and your children as well that are under 18. That are accompanying you, but then the spouse has to then apply and take a second step and apply for what's called an employment authorization document. And this is the document that they'll get around 3 months into being in the United States that allows them to work. Children, unfortunately, in the United States cannot get work permits, just like in Canada. They cannot work in Canada. They cannot work in the United States if you're accompanying a visa holder, okay? Not unless they qualify on their own. So we're going to talk about some practical pointers before we wrap up. And if there are any questions that are coming up, I'll answer them all for you before you wrap up. So the most important thing is before you apply for your TN visa, be proactive. Think about what it is you're trying to do. Think about what it is that you're trying to attain, and make sure you're fully prepared for that. You have to assess why you're going in, why you qualify. Do I have all my documents in a row? Am I ready? Do I look the part? And this is even to say, what I was telling some of your colleagues at the 2 in-person presentations, you need to look the part. Dress professionally, at least business professional or business casual. Be a professional when you go, because the application is as a professional and you want to look like a professional. Consider whether you're going to the right port of entry, okay? And give yourself lots of time and go only during business hours, as I said, Monday to Friday. Do not travel on the weekend. Do not travel on holidays. You know, you're very much going to give yourself problems if you do. Another thing to consider is, are you ineligible? Is there anything on your record from years ago, and believe it or not, it's very common, that would affect your ability to get a work permit in the United States, or even to enter? If you haven't traveled to the United States in many years, and you might have something from 30 years ago, believe me, the chances are it's going to show up, and you could be seen to be ineligible and need to go through the whole visa waiver process. The other thing to consider is, are there medical and admissibility issues? Is there somebody in your family that might have a significant medical and admissibility that could affect your application if they're a part of your family that's moving down? Think about all of that. And the other thing is, are there changes in the law or policies or procedures? Immigration law is constantly changing, and so it's important that you make sure that you've got the most up-to-date information at all times. You can't rely, let's say, on an application that was done 3 years ago and say, I did this 3 years ago, I'll just regurgitate it and do it again. It might not work, because it might be, things might have changed, and it's your responsibility to make sure that you know, or if you sought legal counsel or immigration consulting counsel, that you're getting the best support you can. So it's very important to know the purpose of your entry, your itinerary. Always be courteous. Always be polite. It goes a long way, you know. Even when I travel and I have a Nexus pass and I still get asked, what are you doing? You always want to be courteous and professional at all times, because they have a lot of control and they can affect your ability to travel in the United States. And as I say, always be honest. If you are not honest and they find out that you've misrepresented, you would have a real struggle to go back into the United States. So I really recommend, if you get to the border and things are not looking good for whatever reason, maybe you didn't work with the lawyer, or you've misspoke, or you said something wrong, and or you get somebody who's having a really bad day, try to see if you can just withdraw the application if it sounds like they're not tending to approve you, and say, okay, I'll go back and get more information, and I'll come back and do this again. It's better to have a withdrawal than a refusal on the system about you, okay? The other thing I'd highly recommend for those of you who are looking for work in the U.S. is start now and make an application for a Nexus Pass. Even if you only travel, even personally to the U.S. 2 or 3 times a year, it is so valuable to be able to get into the expedite line. It's $50. You can do it on your own. You don't need a lawyer for this. I highly recommend you do it. It could take 6 to 9 months, though, for your interview if you're doing it at the Calgary airport. But there are other airports you can go to for your interview that are faster. I highly recommend it. If you do end up getting a TN visa in the future, once you get it, you can go through the Nexus Pass line and bypass having to be at the airport so early. And keep that in mind. And again, you have to be a Canadian citizen to qualify for Nexus Pass. You cannot be a green card holder, okay? And you cannot be a permanent resident. All right, and one thing that has come up is, it's very important for the initial TN visa application, you cannot do the application in the Nexus line. So you have to be going through the normal customs line in order to qualify for the TN at the time. Once you get it, then you're eligible to travel through the Nexus Pass line once you have it. But for that initial process of being evaluated and processed, you must do that through the normal line. And that's why I say give yourself 3 hours at the airport. Get there early, avoid the stress. If others are making the application, you don't want to miss your flight over this, okay? So that really wraps up the presentation in terms of the formal information that I wanted to share with you. I'd like to thank you all, and I'd like to just let you know the kinds of services we provide at Ackah Business Immigration Law. We do temporary immigration and permanent immigration, so everything from visitor entry all the way to permanent residence, citizenship, as well on the Canadian and U.S. side, we can help you with. So I'm going to go through the questions that I've got. If you've got any more that we haven't been able to answer, please ask them, and my assistant will bring them in, and we can make this useful. And I'd like to thank you again right now. If any of you are going to drop off, thank you so much for your time. So what about doing a small project for a U.S. company while in Canada? Okay, so if you are working for a U.S. company but you're in Canada, you do not need a U.S. work permit. The U.S. work permit component comes up when you are working in the United States and being paid in the United States. When you're physically in the U.S. and you're in the United States, that's when you need a U.S. visa. If you're doing work remotely and you're in Canada, you do not need a work permit for the United States because you're on Canadian soil. Okay, so just keep that in your mind. And then one of the questions we get asked a lot during the in-person interview or the in-person presentation was, in a U.S. job application, can I answer yes if you're legally entitled to work? Absolutely say yes. And the reason I say that is getting a TN is just once you get the job offer, you do it on your own. You're not looking for employer sponsorship. Okay, it's not an H-1B, it's not an L-1 visa, it's a TN. And you can get it on your own with help from a lawyer so long as you have the job offer. So in my view, I would say yes, I'm legally entitled to work in Canada or in the U.S. As soon as I get a job offer, I can go to the border or the airport and get my TN and bring all my paperwork, and I can start working for you the next day. So that's why I say yes, because I know some of these automated forms and questionnaires and applications, they're cutting you out even before you have the chance to get in the door. So say yes, and then if you have to explain it, you just let them know, as a Canadian, I can be processed right at the border. It can be done in a matter of an hour, and I can start working for you and get my Social Security number and get started right away. So you say here, does the position name matter? Does it have to be civil engineer? The position name does not matter. However, it needs to have engineer in it. In my view, there are a lot of positions where people internally might be called something different. So what I would do maybe is have the employer put in the letter or offer letter, this is your internal title. It might be something different, process director or something related to engineering, and then put in brackets engineer, because you need to make it clear to the officer that this is a job that requires somebody with a bachelor's degree in engineering or a geologist degree or working, as a technician technologist. So we want to make it as clear for them to just bridge that gap between the job title that might be internal and the fact that you're working as a TN under that professional title of engineer. So if possible, please do so. And if the employer doesn't do it and you're doing your own package, or let's say you work with us, we always do that. In our legal letter, we always indicate the internal title is this, but it's an engineer under the NAFTA professional. And then the other one is the L1 visa also renewable every 3 years? So it's a good question. The TN is renewable indefinitely, as I said, excuse me, so long as you can prove that that you have non-immigrant intention and every year it continues. So if that's the case, you can qualify as an engineer for 3 years and 3 years and 3 years and 3 years. But for the L1, there is a cap. But the benefit of the L1, it's actual work permit category that allows you to move to permanent resident in the United States, which is green card. So we have a U.S. immigration lawyer on contract who works for us who does the permanent piece, the green card piece. And so the L1, the first time you get it, you'll get 3 years as an intercompany transfer. And if it's an L1A, the maximum term is 7 years. If it's an L1B, the maximum term is 5 years. So you want to ensure that, yes, you can be renewed again for 2 years terms after for the L1B, 2 more years after the initial 3 year, and you're done. You want to know that within the first year or two, you begin the process of considering, what are my long-term plans? Because you want to get to green card as quickly as you can. What if the company lays you off? What if they go out of business? You want to get to the point where you're a permanent resident in the U.S., but that's not tied to the employer that has transferred you to the U.S. So I would consider doing that right away. Unlike for the TN, it has no prospects directly of taking you from TN to green card. We do work with, as I said, a wonderful U.S. lawyer who does have a special strategy for moving people from TN to green card, but you need the employer support on that. And generally, I would not recommend doing that until you've got a really good relationship, you've proven yourself, it's been 2 or 3 years of employment, then you can start that and go to them and have that conversation. Okay, more questions before we wrap up. If I get a TN, can I get Social Security or 401k? Yes, you can. It depends on the employer. So, I mean, as an employee, as a TN visa holder, not as a consultant, and to make that clear. As a consultant, you have no rights as an employee. You are truly on contract. As a consultant, you're there purely to provide your services, bill and pay your own taxes and deal with your own benefits, etc. If you are an employee, though, it depends on the benefits plan that has been offered to you as a TN visa holder, as an engineer, geologist, technician, technologist. So it depends on that employer, but you would be entitled to a Social Security number because you need to get on payroll. Absolutely, and you need to be able to open bank accounts in the U.S., and you need your Social Security number for that. And oftentimes, you also need your Social Security number even to get a U.S. driver's license for the state or city you're in. Very important. Another question. If I get TN for company X, can I then work for company Y? No. This is what I was referring to when I said sometimes people have 2 or 3 TNs. So if you have 2 or 3 companies that want to offer you employment, whether it's contract, short-term, part-time, you need to get a TN visa for every U.S. employer that you'll be providing services for. And once you've done it once and you qualify, I don't think it'll be very difficult to do it again. But we have some clients who have 3 TNs because they have 3 separate clients that they provide professional services for. And you must have that. If they find out, again, I've said this before, that you're working for company Y, but you have a TN for company X, you are at risk of losing your status and being barred from the United States. So very important to do it right. Another question, employment ends, but TN is still valid. Can I work for a new company on the same TN? No. You would need to get out of the U.S. and get your new TN upon re-entering the U.S. at the airport or the border, or if you wanted to, you could change employers by using the processing centers in the U.S. As a Canadian, and you don't need to wait the weeks and weeks it would take, I would just simply get a new package together, go to the border or the airport, and reapply under that new employer. You cannot be seen to be working for the wrong employer that is different from what's on your TN. That is offside. If my spouse is not a Canadian, will this affect your TN? No, it will not affect your spouse. If your spouse might need a visa to enter the United States as a dependent, and he or she absolutely can come with you. They just might need that extra step of a visa if they're not from a country like a European country where they can get it right at the border. If they need a visa, let's say they come from India or China to enter the U.S., they have to do that, and then they're eligible for the TD to accompany you. It will not affect your TN visa because you're a Canadian citizen. And I think we're getting close to the end of the question. Do U.S. employers have restrictions on TN visas? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Do U.S. employers have restrictions on TN visas? No, the TN is so different. It's not like the LMIA, as you indicated in your question, where you have to go to bat and show that no one else can do the job but this person. TN doesn't have any of that. That process is more of the H-1B or the labor certification process, which is all about green card and long-term, where they have to justify you as somebody who's unique and specially qualified or highly skilled. The TN, there are no caps, and therefore there's no need to prove why they need this Canadian to do the job. So that's wonderful. There are no caps, so it's unlimited number for now. Today, the way the law is, there's no cap, unlike the H-1B, which has 65,000 cap per year, and which always, now they have to, in order to get an H-1B, you have to do a lottery. It's a real big challenge. And one of the other questions here, before we wrap up, everybody, is that if we have a PN membership, do we still have to show your original degree? Yes, because the PN has nothing to do with the NAFTA professional category. That's related to 𝒂𝒃. That's related to your professional regulatory body. You need to have the original degree when you get to the border, or your original transcripts. I recommend both, and you have to go out of your way to really try to find them. Some officers will accept photocopies, but some will absolutely send you back. And so we're just trying to prepare you the best we can for the worst case scenario. Have your original. Another question, what are immigration medical requirements? There are none for Canadians going to the U.S. The reason I mentioned it on one of the slides is if somebody's entering the U.S. and is clearly unhealthy, clearly seems to have a significant medical issue that could be a risk that they consider might be a violation, they might have you do medicals, but most people don't have to do that. So if I have a Canadian company, can I get an L1 and set up a sister company in the U.S.? Yes. However, you need to keep in mind that the company in Canada has to be actively engaged in business, and you need to have people here, you need to have an office here to show that you're actively engaged in business. And when you open the new U.S. sister office, you have to be able to show that you're going to be employing people and have an address and engaging in contracts and providing services. So both have to be active. They cannot just be holding companies that allow you to get an L1. That will not fly with immigration. And you also need to know that for the first year of immigration, for the first year of an L1 of a brand new business, they'll only give you a 1 year. It's called a new Office L. If you haven't already been established and in business for more than a year, at the time you make your application, you'll need things like a business plan, growth plan, forecast, potential clients. You might have clients already. They'd like to see address of where you're based, a lease, lots and lots of things to prove that we're starting up. And so for that first year, they'll give you 1 year. And once you go back and you've proven in that first year you've done business and you've employed 1 or 2 or more Americans, and there's revenue being generated, even if it's a loss at the end of the year, then you can get a longer term L1. I think those are most of the questions that I can take today. I know there are lots of U.S. tax questions. I'm not a tax expert. I do not give tax advice. We do have 2 or 3 tax accountants and tax people that we refer our clients to. So if you're interested, you can contact us through my email address, evelyn@ackalaw.com, or 𝒅𝒐𝒏'𝒕@ackalaw.com, and I can flip their contacts to you. I highly recommend, if you're going to be working in the U.S., you do speak to a tax advisor because you will have obligations to file. Maybe not pay tax, depends on how much time or how much money you make in the U.S., but absolutely you'll have filing obligations in the U.S. as well. So I'd like to thank you all for your participation. If you enjoyed this, please let 𝒂𝒂𝒉 know. And also, I think that you can see that we've attached the handouts. So if you look on your screen, the handouts have all been uploaded. If you have any troubles at all, just contact my office and we can send them to you directly. Again, we offer consultations for an hour or half hour that are paid. So if anybody would like to really drill down in their specific situation and talk about TN in more depth specific to you, feel free to contact us. Thank you. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye.